All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome. We have a small, intimate group here, which is a nice size for a very hot evening like this. Hopefully, we'll have a few more people that will be joining us, but we're meeting today to talk about a potential bond referendum and some of the issues that we've been contending with or we realize is imminent that we have to take care of throughout the school district. So as you know, probably for the last, I would say 7 to 8 years, districts have not been able to do the type of modifications and upgrades that we've been able to do in the past because of a number of reasons, financial reasons, and we also have, we're now dealing with the tax cap. So all of this put together, we are kind of falling a little bit behind with what we should be doing for our school district and our upgrades. So tonight we're going to talk about the first of some needs, and we're going to call this phase 1 of needs. And we're going to be talking about upgrades that we will be looking at for a number of reasons, and we'll kind of explain each one. And then we're going to talk about a phase 2. Is there a need for a phase 2? Is this something we should be looking for? And what should we be doing in the future? So tonight, the focus is going to be on phase 1, the needs of the district at this moment in time, and the thinking that's gone through by our Board of Education and the people within the school district with expertise and our architect who is here tonight. So I'd like to start by introducing everybody here, and maybe you could say your name and your relationship to the school district and why you're here.
Ann Dinio, School Business Manager.
John D'Angelo, Fuller & D'Angelo Architects.
Michael Twardy, Director of Facilities.
Diana Hurd, parent.
Hi, I'm Kathy Curto. I'm a parent.
Tim Etta, parent.
Jen Daly, I'm on the Board of Education and also a parent.
And I'm Paul Henderson. I'm a parent and also on the Buildings and Grounds Committee.
So this meeting is really the culmination of a year-long conversation, and tonight we're going to talk about what we discussed and some of the suggestions that were made and what our next steps are. So this year, as I said, the members of both the Board of Education and the district's Building and Grounds Committee came together to really look at the needs of the school district. And one of the things I'd like to highlight, hi Sandy. One of the things I'd like to highlight is we've placed the Building and Grounds agenda minutes on the front page of our website. So if you want to go through and watch the progression of the conversation and the information that was discussed through the year, they will be there and you can learn a little bit more about it. We're also starting to put the information that we're presenting tonight. So if you're not here, you can take a look at it and you can figure out kind of the progression that occurred. So we met with our Building and Grounds Committee, and the charge of the committee was really to explore where we are within the Haldane School District and the needs that we have that we're aware of, and also the Building Conditions Survey, which was done, was it 2 years ago now? 2 years ago, kind of highlights the needs for the next 5 years. And we went into the Building Conditions Survey, we prioritized what the needs are, and then we had discussions and tours and a lot of conversation about what we need right now to make us continue to be able to provide education to our children in the most appropriate ways. So tonight we're going to talk about phase 1, and we're going to present the absolute needs. These are things that we're just going to have to do. These are things that if we don't do it, it's going to become a problem for the school district to maintain the level of education we presently have, and we'll be explaining a little bit more about that. We will, at the end, talk a little bit about phase 2 and get some ideas, some of your thinking, and then we'll continue on to decide on next steps for phase 1. And again, you can follow the process by looking at the website and learning about what we've talked about in the past and where we're going now. So what we need to do, we're looking at the capacity, the space, the tools, of our entire campus, and some of the areas, well, it sounds like it's beginning to rain, and some of the areas that we really need to focus on. You'll see that one of our areas of focus this year is to make sure technology is ubiquitous throughout the districts. This is going to require that we have increased electricity, different points for Wi-Fi, and areas that we presently are not servicing well will have to be updated. Additionally, we're going to be looking at things like heating systems. We're going to be looking at windows. We're going to be looking at the abilities of windows to open. We're going to be looking at some of the plans that have been in the past that just haven't worked the way we want them to, and how we can change those now. We're also going to look at the long-range facilities plan, and we're going to say what we need to be doing now and what we need to be doing in the future. We're also going to be bringing into the discussion the strategic plan. Part of the strategic plan included a facilities study or a facilities discussion of how, when we're educating 21st century learners, how this differs in our educational practices now than it did in the past, and clearly there are different needs related to that. Okay, why capital projects? And this is basically where we are. We want to ensure that we can continue to provide a blue ribbon education for our kids. And that means everything that goes along with creating the kind of educational system that is in place now and continuing to maintain that through the years. We need to address long-term needs, and we're going to be the absolute needs we're going to be talking about in Phase 1, and the potential needs we're going to be discussing in Phase 2, but this really will be a focus on Phase 1. And we're going to be looking at, without the capital projects, what's happened to the buildings, what parts of the buildings really need to be addressed at this point. All right, so needs Phase 1. If you've been watching any of the Board of Education minutes, you probably have heard us begin to discuss the heating system in this building, in the elementary and middle school building. For those of you who have been following the needs of the district and we've been watching what has happened, we did replace the boilers for this school building a number of years back. What was it?
2012.
2012. And so we have new boilers. But the part of the building that wasn't upgraded, that needs to be for the heating system, is the delivery system. And what we have learned is when this building was built, the piping behind the walls, which now carries steam to the different parts of the building, they are beginning to fail. And this year we had a number of instances where the pipes were actually starting, they were leaking, there was steam coming out of them. It created problems both internally within the walls and externally, and it happened over and over again. And as this was happening, we asked a company to come in with a degree of expertise that could tell us what was going on. And basically they said, your heating delivery system is very old. It was built in the 30s. It's going to continue to cause problems, and there has to be a solution that comes quickly. And looking at the potential types of solutions, we could either go into the walls and break through the walls and fix what's there, which doesn't seem like a smart idea or economical, or we can do what the architects are telling us, and I'll let John D'Angelo talk a little bit more about that, but basically it's to install a new delivery system. And so at that point, we'll be able to continue to heat the building. We're looking at, hopefully, cross our fingers, getting another 2 years out of this system before we have a major issue within the building. And by that time, we'll hopefully have a new delivery system that transports the heat throughout the building. The other thing we're looking at is pneumatic controls, which I will allow people who have a much better understanding of it than I to explain that. Things like the pump room. I mean, these are not extravagant or luxurious needs. These are kind of basic nuts and bolts. We have a problem with our pump room and the electrical panels within the pump room. We need to replace horizontal unit ventilators, which are the things you're seeing here, with vertical ones. And I'm not sure exactly why we're choosing the vertical over the horizontal, but that's your area of expertise, and you can explain that to us. We need to replace some air handling units in the cafeteria, and we're looking at climate control in the upper music room, the band, music, and multipurpose rooms, and the main building of this building, and the middle school office, or the high, and potentially the high school. That's something we have to talk about. We could probably look at doing something in here for a little climate control, since today it's 90 degrees plus and it's 80 degrees in here with the air conditioner on. So that's part of phase one. Okay, with the piping system, this is kind of a user-friendly diagram, which means I understand what it means, and it's kind of what we need to do. But basically, we're talking about taking what presently on the upper part is a steam system that delivers steam through the building, and actually turn it into a hot water system with the new delivery system. Again, from the same boilers, they would have to be retrofitted in order to convert from steam to water, but that's basically what we have to do within this building. Some of the other needs of the building, we have our bathrooms that were circa 1977. And just to kind of give you an understanding of how long ago that was the year I graduated from high school. So now I'm a grandma, and these have been along with me for many years, and as you can see, they're in need of repair, they're in need of upgrade, they're in need of remodeling. Some other areas that we talked about in the elementary schools. If you've been in the elementary classrooms, especially on a day like today, you'll understand how difficult it is to just get fresh air and cool off those rooms. Basically, the windows that were placed there, the majority of them don't open. The windows on the bottoms, they tip out, and we were able to put screens on them to keep the bees out, but we're still not able to make it comfortable, and we still don't have the circulation that's needed in those rooms. So we're actually talking about replacing the windows, also replacing the egress windows to allow for our students to leave if there's ever a problem within the classroom. We're starting to get some decay in the sills, and there's areas underneath the windows where the rainwater has created problems, and we have to address those. Even if we don't replace the windows, we have to address the sills that are under the windows. We're going to be also looking at putting in shades, basically for climate stabilization, keeping the rooms cool on days like this, and looking at stairwell curtain walls and replacing the exterior doors. And they have been problematic as well. So other items, we're looking at in the main building, replacing the balcony seating that's in the auditorium or the small gym, however you'd like to talk about that, just putting a coat of paint on the walls, replacing water heaters, looking at replacing the cafeteria floor that has seen many better days. Mabel Merritt, we're looking at ceiling tile abatement, and a project which should have been done probably decades ago, but we just haven't been able to do it because they are hot with asbestos. Also, electrical upgrades, paving of certain areas, especially out on the playground, and repaving that area, and guardrails along Craigside Drive, or the areas that are right above the sports facilities below. We have cars that park, and then there's just a large dip, and there are no guardrails there. So that's something we're also looking to do. So as you can see, this is mainly a health and safety type of situation. All the things that we're talking about in this are just kind of nuts and bolts, and they're things that we need to replace and to change to keep the quality of the building such that we can educate kids.
Question on phase one. When you
Sure.
talk about the heating system in the building, how much of that system was abated prior? Of the piping system that needs to be replaced?
The whole boiler room was abated.
Boiler room was abated, but what
Yes.
about everything that's run through the school? How far have you abated?
We really haven't abated behind the walls, we just haven't done it.
Right.
We've done some minor abatements in the auditorium downstairs, and yes.
As far as the removal of the existing system, once you start putting the new system in, because it looks like you're converting it to from a steam system to a hot water system, how far will the abatement continue?
I don't think we'll have to abate at that point. Do you agree? Because we're going to just leave all the old piping where it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the new piping is going to be within the rooms, run within the rooms. So we're just going to abandon the old return pipes and supply pipes, steam pipes.
We're leaving it for another day.
The asbestos?
Yes.
Well, there's...
The plan was not to open up plaster walls.
Right.
And to do destructive,
A lot of the heat piping that runs through the tunnel down below, from one end of the school
Yep.
to the other, has that all been fully abated through there? I'm not talking about the piping that goes up through the wall.
yeah, I think anything that was
tunnel.
exposed both in the
Yes.
boiler room and in the tunnel has been abated.
We think or we know?
We
In
know.
the tunnel, yes.
The tunnel,
Yes.
definitely.
Anything that's exposed, the expectation, I would think, would be abated as part of this project. I'm not saying tear the whole school apart to get
Yes.
into it.
Right.
But there is considerable amount of heating piping, steam piping that ran through this facility, you know, that, I know the boiler rooms were done when the boilers were done, but the remainder of the piping that's throughout, I mean, I think we as citizens of the community would want to be clear about where the extent of the abatement was and what's left to do as part of this project. Right? It doesn't matter, once it's encapsulated in the wall, it is what it is, but a fire in the school, God forbid, will, right? It will be dealing with that at another time with the friable material, right? So whatever's exposed, you know, we really need to understand, was that truly fully done? Is it included in the $3 to $4 million that we're talking about up here?
Yeah.
With a 25% slush.
Right, well, we haven't done any full evaluations or designed any systems to really start to fine tune that estimated amount.
Yeah.
That was just in discussions in other projects we've done of a similar nature, have been in that cost range. Definitely, as we start to move through the design and look at the specific components of the design, we'll be evaluating what areas of the building are going to be disturbed, if we are going to disturb any asbestos that's currently existing, either in the floors or friable or piping insulation. We would definitely recommend, if there is exposed installation, anything exposed gets abated as part of the project, if there is any exposed left.
So as part of that $3 to $4 million is for the heating system specifically, is there a environmental survey that's part of that to identify the areas of the building that still need to be abated that are exposed, not just because we're touching the ends, but if there's stuff that's still exposed that both the janitors and the school personnel could be exposed to, right? Because all we're doing is we're pushing it to another date, and I've lived here all my life, and I've watched this school push its budgets to,
Right.
you know, while we've done other things because they were the flashy thing to do, you know, we didn't worry about the bones of the school, right? So the concern is really to make sure when we do this, if we're going to spend the money, we're done with it,
Yeah.
right?
And actually,
the
one of-
community does not have to deal with this again.
Right, and one of
For-
the
for-
reasons
for
why we're
15 years.
having this focus group is for that reason.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at what we believe is important, but the historic understanding of what's been going on is also important. And so if there are places that need to be considered, that's why John is here. So he can help us figure out what to do. And right now, with just the scope that we're talking about, we have a guesstimate, but that guesstimate may change.
It's a very soft estimate with 25% plus or minus, with a 25% plus or minus, and then another 25%. It's a $2 million float. And if the asbestos hasn't been truly considered, that float can be significantly more, which is why I'm asking very,
Right.
very specific questions to make sure that, you know, when we go into this, we should be going into it with our eyes open and not halfway get into it and then we're asking for more money along
Yep.
the way.
And we understand
That will turn off people quicker than you could think of.
Right, I understand that, yeah, I think that,
And as
and
we
it's good
move-
to know.
As we move along in the project, we'll start to identify a more concrete design, both mechanically. We'll be working with the environmental engineers to do an evaluation of the entire building, to identify any areas that would potentially be a problem, or any areas that we do want to abate as an extension of the project. And I think as we move along, we'll further define the costs involved in all that work. And as we move towards the final bond resolution and the final bond scope, we'll have a much more definitive dollar amount and a more concrete numbers.
John, can I just ask you, so just on that topic, the abatement, is it a goal, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but would it be a goal to abate all asbestos in the school, including in the walls? Or is that not really a goal? Is it not really something that's reasonable? It's not really.
I mean,
it'd be
it
nice.
could be
I'm
a
not saying
goal.
it's like a
Yes,
bad thing
it's
to have
not. I
happen,
mean, nobody
but-
wants to keep asbestos in their building. It can be a goal to eliminate all the asbestos. Some of the asbestos floor tiles or asbestos that's within some materials are not friable. They're in good shape. They can remain in place with really really no health impacts. Some of the asbestos is buried within plaster walls, so even to get to it involves a lot of deconstruction, opening up walls, abating it, and then rebuilding all those walls. So it gets to a cost factor. Is there a reasonable return on the investment just for the sake of eliminating the asbestos from within the walls? And usually the answer is no. I mean, most districts, if it's encapsulated within the walls, it would remain there. And there's really no projects that I've worked on where a district has said, we don't care what the cost is, we want every piece of asbestos out of our building and get it done. And it's usually, usually most districts don't have that luxury to go ahead and arbitrate and just
and it's my understanding
blanket.
that the pulling apart of the wall and going in is one of the reasons that your suggestion is to do a new piping system on the outside, because that going in is so
And part of,
intrusive and financially
part of the
intrusive.
design is going to be developing those routes of the piping, how we're going to get that distribution throughout the building, providing minimal disruption within the classrooms, integrating it with the existing architecture, and really make it a seamless installation.
But yet, if we had any kind of safety issue or health and safety related issue, we would look at that immediately. So that we have to
There might be
see.
some walls that we are going to open up in order to run the mains and the vertical risers, that we might want to do it within existing risers that have steam lines within it. So we might be opening up walls, we might be doing abatement. We're going to evaluate all those areas where we will be disturbing existing construction, and we have to test those materials. And if they haven't been tested, even the plaster within the walls, any plaster on the ceilings, any ceiling tiles, all those materials have to be tested, verified that there's no asbestos-containing materials, and as we move forward.
Sandy?
So I have a question coming from a perspective of a complete layman. I'm not an architect or an engineer, so I don't know what's involved. But I was having a conversation with Joe Curto a few weeks ago about capital improvements. And the question, and it was really just this very open-ended question came up, which was, at what point do you keep repairing an old building and keep putting the Band-Aids on, and at what point do you say, maybe it's not worth it, and you should start afresh with a new building? And I again, I don't know what that would mean, to build a new structure and tear down an old structure. But if you think into the future, not just 5 years from now, but 20 years from now, what does it really mean to keep repairing this building? And is that something that is really economically feasible in the long run?
So, I mean, that's something that needs to be discussed as well, or at least addressed. I don't know if it's necessarily, that would be an in the future type of discussion. Right now, we just have to figure out in 2 years how we're going to open the school. So that's part of it. So.
I think you'll see a mass exodus out of this village if you start to see people look at a brand-new school with the tens of millions of dollars that we're talking about here. I mean, we live in a community that's Victorian, that the houses have been here since the 1800s. and it's drawing people here to maintain those facilities, those structures. I don't see the population of this school growing exponentially that would justify a brand-new building and a brand-new school district, you know, for brand new. I mean, the bones of this building were built in the 1930s. Yes, it has asbestos throughout. Yes, it is being managed, hence the question that I wanted to make sure that the TSI thermal system insulation is being addressed that is exposed, that's left, right? And if it isn't, then we know the cost, so it can be dealt with in future referendums. That's fine, right? But as far as looking at the school population, it's pretty much the same for the last almost 30 years. I mean, it really goes a little bit high, a little bit low, but it stays about the same point. You know, you look at our community is basically the same population. So give or take, right? So, you know.
And one of the things we have been talking about is doing a demographic study. So we really have an idea of where we're going. We know that we have a large number of people that are coming into the area, and we need some data. We need some information that's going to help us make decisions in an informed way. Okay, so we have a number of assumptions that we've been talking about kind of over and over again, and these are things we want to bring to you. And so I am going to actually, as far as the information, Ann Dinio, our school business manager.
Thank you. Everyone, of course, wants to know how much it's going to cost, and we have some of the estimates, not all of it in. And how are we going to pay for this? We will definitely have to sell bonds to pay for this because it's not something that can fit into our annual school budget. So what would happen is that we would want to issue 15-year bonds because our state aid comes back to us over 15 years. And the state aid at 34.6% helps pay for the debt service payments within the same time frame. A lot of times, schools may take out a 30-year bond, but they're only getting state aid over 15 years. That last 15 years, it's unequal, and you're not having a nice, smooth trade-off of the debt, the expense to the revenue. So while construction is taking place, we would issue by bond anticipation notes, and they can be over the course of 5 years. If the construction doesn't take 5 years, which we don't anticipate that it would, we can bond that at the time, because if I file the final expenditure report, that's when the state aid kicks in, and you want to match that 15-year of debt to 15-year of revenue. We have a great rating. We have a AA3 rating, which is great for a school district. It keeps our interest rates low. Right now, if we were to bond, it would be in the mid-twos, 2.5% to 2.75%. So it's early to talk about when those debt service schedules would kick in. I can tell you that we have a bond anticipation note that will be bonding in 1920. That is the turf field. That was a tax-neutral project because that was tied to the James Pond land sale, which is pending, and the building aid payments will start next year. So we'll match that. So the turf field financing, it was already planned when we did the project that there would not be a tax impact. So although we'll be doing the paperwork for that bond, that's not going to increase our expense in the general fund budget. In 17-18 is our final payment on the 2003 Energy Performance Contract Bond. That original issue was just under $600,000. That'll be paid off. And the next debt service that retires is in fiscal year 2023-24. That's the final payment on our roof project from 2009, and that original issue was $1.6 million. So we will be able to offset new debt service expense with retiring debt and state aid. But in answer to everyone's question that I hear already is there will be an increase to the budget because of the debt service of these projects, because of the amount, the gap.
What opportunities from an O&M reduction can offset some of that tax levy to the budget? Because again, we got to pay for the money to pay for the capital improvements. It's like your mortgage, right? You pay the interest plus the premium back, right? So what considerations from an O&M, possibly an administrative area where things could soften that blow a little bit for this referendum?
So I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I think that part of the whole process is really to look at everything and to consider it. And right now, we're for the first time, really sharing the information of some of the concerns that we have in the district. And now the focus group helps us to kind of think through other areas. Every time we build a budget, we look internally. And so if you've been watching us build the budgets over the last few years, we have been trying to be as, I guess, unique and inventive in our ways of creating the budget, and most of it has been to go into it. So I can tell you that we have done that, we will do that, and certainly will be something here that we consider.
I think part of, if this goes to a referendum, part of a successful referendum would be to show very clearly the puts and takes on the O&M side of what we're doing without on the O&M, to try to say, because of this, we're going to kind of give up this a little bit. We may give up this position as an administrative, but whatever it may be,
right?
That would help the taxpayers understand that yes, we need this, and yes, the school board and the school district is trying to balance the needs versus maybe some of the wants, if you will. Right?
And I think we have to be very careful in the way that we approach that too, because we want to make sure that we're going to still be able to provide the right amount of everything that we're doing right now. So it takes some inventive kind of maneuvering. One of the other things that's also important to let you know is that we're at about 35 cents on the dollar we get back in state aid. So as we're retiring debt, and if we are to then roll it into that, we also get a third of that back from the state in state aid. So if we're looking at $2 million of retired debt plus our 30%, we're looking at $3 million of building. And so that's something we have to consider too.
I would just like to add something that I just want everyone to be aware also is that I was here, through the whole gap elimination project and the reduced budget and all of the budget cuts, and we've been operating on a shoestring, and a lot of what you see where things have to be addressed is because when things get cut from your operating budget, preventive maintenance, unfortunately, is one of them, and then you see the effects later on. If you're, penny wise and pound foolish, is that the saying? A lot of times if you're trying to save $1 now, you're going to spend a lot more later when things that haven't been maintained because you've been cutting in areas start to fail. So I've seen that happen.
Okay, next one. Okay, so one of the things we asked John to do is, and he can kind of give us more of an indication of some of the technical stuff that you may have questions about that I'm not the right person to answer. But we also asked him for a timeline, and you have a copy of that in front of you. And this would be, if we were to start now, what are we realistically looking at for construction and from when we're actually looking at a vote? So.
What I really looked at is trying to take a hypothetical vote date, and our initial discussions were potentially have a bond vote in conjunction with the budget vote next year, which is May 15th. So looking at that May 15th date and then trying to outline some of the steps that have to be done in order to meet that date, and then a tentative timeline in implementing that bond once it's passed. looking at a lot of the durations, construction durations, or some of the review durations, either before or after the vote, a lot of that, those timelines can be adjusted. They might grow depending on the scope of work, depending on how the construction is decided to implement it, how many contracts we're going to award, how we want to phase it out, and there might be some financial implications or some need to phase the work out to stretch out some of the financing. So it's very preliminary right now, but just kind of gives an idea of some of the steps that we have to really look at, and some of the key items that have to be done. If we are looking at a bond vote in May, there are some legal issues that have to be addressed prior to that. The board has to pass a bond resolution. The board has to vote on that at least 45 days prior to that bond vote. So that date has to be really reviewed on and worked with the bond counsel to get the bond to the board and written, so the board can pass that resolution within that 45 days, or not after that 45 days. In order to pass that bond resolution, then the board has to have a clearly defined scope, clearly defined cost. That scope has to be written into the resolution and clearly defined to the taxpayers. So all that work has to occur prior to that, so the board can be in a position to pass that resolution. The board also has to declare that the project will have no adverse environmental impacts. That's part of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and it requires any projects which are using state funding, which by receiving aid from the state, the project would be, and any municipal projects to be really reviewed to ensure that there's no environmental impact. Looking at most of the projects, and they're smaller projects, they're all renovation projects within the building, so they'd all be considered a type 2 action under environmental law. So in looking at the scope of work now, that shouldn't be an issue, but it's something that we have to just keep on the table, make sure the board is aware, and they have to pass that resolution declaring the projects have no environmental impact. The board, as the lead agency in the environmental review, is obligated by law to do that. So it's a step in the process that we just have to make sure we're aware of. But everything before that is really working with the committees, with the administration, developing the scope, really ironing out the scope, looking at all the variables, coming up with a solid budget, solid cost estimate, so we can move forward, and then crafting that bond resolution with the board and with the bond counsel and with our construction team to ensure that we have a clear scope, we can present it to the public, and then we have a clear, hard cost estimate that we're comfortable in moving forward. So once that bond is approved, we can move forward, complete all the projects that we're anticipating and that were presented, and we stay within that dollar amount that was approved by the voters within the bond.
And John, I'm assuming that, there's a estimation of how much things cost, and the board approves it based on that, and then hopefully the voters approve it based on that. But then once we go into actual construction, some things could come up, like once you're actually in the mix. Things might come up that you didn't anticipate, or might cost more, or cost differently. And is that something that, as things come up, is it something that's brought back to the board to talk about, or the public to talk about, or is it something that we kind of use the budget, use the money, and you guys kind of finagle, okay, well, this is more, so we're going to take this from here and move this to here? Like, what happens as things shift a little?
It is an estimate going into it. We're developing an estimate a year and a half, 2 years prior to actually awarding construction and getting the work done. So we are putting together an estimate. Costs are going to change. Some scope items might be altered. Some projects might not be able to get done. That's really going to be a board policy on how much they want to take back to the public. I mean, it should be a transparent process throughout. And then how much leeway is the board, as a board policy, want to give to administration during construction? Items are going to come up, change orders, requests by contractors for additional money, some modifications. As we start to open up walls, we might find some differing conditions. So then it becomes a board policy on how much leeway they want to give to administration to be able to authorize any additional costs, any change in the project scope, or bring it back to the board, and then the board can make those decisions on whether they want to look at it internally or then present whatever modifications or changes to the public.
So, John, also, we might add that in the project, the different pieces, when we go out to bid, there are alternates, right, within the items that are bid, and depending on the replies and what can get done, because we don't know what the market is going to be like when we go out to bid. So there might be alternates that, if it comes in favorable, we might be able to afford all of the alternates. If not, we don't get everything on there. So some flexibility is built in to the bids.
Yeah, as we start to develop the designs, I'm sure there's going to be items that, well, while we're doing this, it would be nice to do this, or we should address these items also. Some of it might be some additional asbestos abatement or things of that nature, where as we start to develop it, we can put those into the bid package as an alternate bid. So yeah, we do get competitive or favorable bids. The climate when we are out to bid is favorable. We can take advantage of that and complete some of the projects that we want to complete under the bond. Or if it's not, we have some leeway then in the bids that we receive to adjust it to make sure that we stay within the budget.
Part of what you're talking about is essentially how tight the bid documents and the scope are. You know, the work that goes into the scope and the bid documents that these folks are going to be bidding on, how tight that is, because, you know, that's where the extras start to propagate from. If we don't do our homework up front and we don't have a tight bid package, then the contractors are going to make their money on the extras, right? And that's not what this is about.
Especially in the competitive bid environment that we deal with public bids, the bid documents have to be tight. They have to be clear, concise, and
the scopes have to be very clean.
yes,
There has to be very minimal or no ambiguities in the scope of works. Otherwise,
exactly.
So, what the question on the estimates, your final estimates that will come out in the next number of months as the scopes are being developed, if this moves forward? What are the typical contingencies, percentages on those? I'm sure it's not a zero base. I'm sure there's contingencies on those numbers for issues such as we're talking about here. Is it 5% contingency, 10% contingency? What goes into those numbers to base the bid referendum, the bid bond on?
I mean, probably prior to the bond, we'll have some design contingencies. We won't have final designs prior to the bond, so we'll have some design contingencies. I would recommend a 5% construction contingency. And depending on the scope of work, if we're doing a lot of destructive work within the building, maybe recommend a little higher percentage to address anything that happens during construction, any field conditions that are discovered as we start to open up walls, those type contingencies.
So essentially 5% construction on top of some, you're probably talking probably a 90% design package when you go out to bid?
Out to bid is 100%.
You're 100% at that point.
It's got to be. With competitive bids, we're awarding the contract. It's a public bid. There's no negotiations after the fact. Once the bids are received,
There's no mysteries. There's no mysteries.
There should be none.
Right. No, but when the bond is floated, when the taxpayers vote on the bond, or what the dollars are, I'm just trying to get a feel for what the float will be.
Yeah,
based on where where you anticipate the engineering designs to be, and versus what we're asking the public to vote on, and the contingencies that are associated with it. Typically, what you're looking at.
right. Prior to the bond would be the construction costs plus a 10% design contingency, and then a 5% construction contingency.
John, I know this is an overview, I mean, that's what we're doing here, it's kind of an overview. Oh, sorry. I know this is an overview, but I just had a question. This schedule is really about this phase one, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, that I don't know anything about this bond issue, but you can't, I mean, I would think you can't carry a contingency as part of the bond value, right? You can't carry 5% in there, but it would be more like of a alternates that you could execute during it, is that correct? Or can you carry a contingency in the bond issue?
You can carry it in. The bond resolution is really going to outline what the plan the district wants to implement, the scope of work, and a dollar amount. So the voters would vote to approve a dollar amount with as much, it's not going to be a hard, the scope of work written in the bond resolution might say upgrade the heating system within the main building, and it might be that general. So it's going to authorize the district to spend X amount of $10 million, whatever the bond is, to do heating upgrades within the main building. So there's a lot of leeway in what that scope of work is going to be.
Contingency can be built into.
So a
that
contingency
bond.
has to be
Yeah.
built into it because we're putting together an estimated project, based upon a year and a half, 2 years
And
between
generally-
establishing the estimate to really completing construction.
The way
starting
that the
construction.
bond is actually written, it will say up to.
Okay.
And so, there's some leeway there. But yes, everything that you potentially need or could potentially need within the building project has to be there.
And then the other question I have is, and I know it's an overview, but I just want
Mm-hmm.
to look at, so the project completion is in November of 19, so you'd be looking at phasing things that are not affecting school life, daily school life, to complete during that time?
Yeah, really
Kind of
looking at
punch
it
list
at
or something?
trying to get most of the work done within the summer, starting in the spring, projects that we can start before the school year's over, completing the majority of the work over the completion, and then finishing it up as the school year progresses, and total project completion sometime in November. But not knowing,
By that bond vote, right? I mean, that's the date that's kind of.
I mean, that's
Driving.
really issuing it, driving it going forward. I mean, because that's where everything starts, our design process, completing the construction documents, the submittal to the state. I mean, right now, the state is at a 5-6 month review time. They've hired some additional personnel. Everyone's hoping that review time gets reduced moving forward, but that we haven't seen it yet. So hopefully we'll see. But so it really moves from that vote date, from the construction end, from that vote date moving on. So I mean, ideally, to be able to get approval so we can award contracts and be out to bid early in the bidding season. If we're planning work for the summer, to be out to bid January, February, March. The problem is, as you start to wait, contractors become busy. Fewer and fewer contractors are available for the summer. So it's beneficial to bid early and get it done. And then when we're dealing with heating plant or heating upgrades, then we have to look at getting it done in the off season and the heating season, and have that system operational for October, November.
So, looking towards the future, there are a number of other questions that have come up, and we have decided that it's probably the best practice at this point to really look at what we need to do now, understand that there are some things that we may need to do in the future, but we're just not at the point that we're going to do them all together. So we want to at least mention them here. So we are talking about the next phase is like, what do we have to do for this district to continue the instructional practices that are needed for the present pedagogy, to meet the needs of the strategic plan, and what would be the next steps. So you should all have a copy of this, which is kind of like our blueprint of what we've done and where we're going. And so on the bottom, it talks about the things that we've already done and we've been able to do within the budget. This section here is what we're presently talking about, and this is what we need to do, the needs phase 1. Some of the other things that we'll need to do, and this again is not the time to be discussing this, we're looking at phase 1 now, but there would be a continued conversation about a phase 2 and if there is a need for phase 2, and that would be more driven by the strategic plans, the needs for instruction, the needs of the district. I'm sure that many of you who have been at the high school realize when it was built and it's basically offices and classrooms, and no common areas are there, and the students come down here. So this is going to be something in the future that the community is going to have to look at, and is that the way we want to continue with our high school, or are there different things that we need to look to do? And we're talking about the potential of, in the future, looking at new spaces and new learning structures and seeing what's happening as we move into the next 5 to 10 years. So some of the things we've been talking about, but again, this is just to be mentioned at this point. This is not the time that we're going to be looking at developing that. We're talking about, we have some people that are talking about the potential of an auditorium up there and some funding that may be received by the district in order to support this. If we were to look at the high school, we'd be looking at a high school expansion or a new place in the high school where a number of these things, flex space where a number of these things can happen. One would be to look at creating some more classroom space, which is very difficult. At this point, we're using Mabel Merritt to capacity. Maybe a large group instruction area, a cafeteria that's up there as opposed to having it down here. A media center and a wellness center are some of the things that have been discussed. And that's kind of where we are. That's our thinking at this point. So this document, again, phase 1 is with where the orange heading. Phase 2 would be the yellow heading, and some other information, including what we've already been able to do within the main budget, is below. So that's kind of our introduction. And John is here for, do you want to say anything about the heating system itself that you haven't said, which is probably the biggest portion of this?
Just to elaborate a little further on the heating system, the original building was designed as a steam system. When they built the 1960s edition, the gym and the locker rooms, that's a hot water system. So that pump room we were talking about is a small room that has the pumps that circulate the hot water. So the steam from the boiler go out to that pump room. There's a heat exchanger within that room, which takes the steam. There's a hot water coil, so the hot water from the 60s wing runs through that half of the building. The steam serves this building, and it's distributed to the radiators and the equipment within this building. But that pump room we're talking about is a relatively small room. It has the circulation pumps, the heat exchanger, there's a ton of valves, expansion tanks, and it's all crammed in this probably 8 by 8 foot room. There's electric panels that they jammed in there too. So as there have been problems in that room with steam leaks and pipe failures, we've had electrical issues. Obviously, the water and electric shouldn't mix. So one of by eliminating that the steam and to hot water conversion and that heat exchanger, we can eliminate the pumps and all the equipment within that room, so it'll clean up that place. It'll be one system throughout the entire building, so you're not generating steam then to make hot water. So you'll gain some efficiency, and then the controls get much better. The controls are much more efficient with a hot water system.
Just wanted to add to that too. It also means that we don't have to move some very large electrical panels. And that's a significant savings to not have to move those, which are in that room, right? So if we make that conversion soon enough, that would be an expense that would be avoided.
The leaks that you guys talked about earlier on the first part of the heating system, was that part of the steam piping or was that part of the condensate return systems?
Mostly the condensate return and mostly pipes that were in cement.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Steam pipes usually aren't the problem. It's
Right.
usually
It's
the
always
condensate
the
return
condensate,
system
yeah.
that is the issue.
I think there was a report done, wasn't there, a few years ago with regards to the steam piping system? And if I remember correctly, there was going to be a follow-up to that? And maybe I missed it.
2005 and 2006, there was a pre-bond evaluation report from Damiano Baril.
Right.
And, yeah, there was a report back then.
Okay.
And it recommended exactly what we're talking about today.
Exactly.
So even
Okay.
a decade ago, that was a concern.
So that's the basis of the $3-4 million project, was that original report? Okay.
This has been floating around since the early 80s, December, what you guys saw. That pump room down in the bottom has been problematic for decades. So I mean, but this to be clear, the parts that are giving us problems are the condensate return, not the steam piping. You let us believe
Yeah,
That's-
if it was steam
yes.
piping, and that's not really accurate, because someone may, be able to.
Part of the steam system,
Part of the
yes.
steam system, right?
Yes.
It's the condensate return systems
Yeah,
that bring the water back to the boilers.
right. Just to clarify, the boiler creates steam. Steam comes out to the radiators, to the systems. As part of the system is a steam trap, and what it does, as the steam starts to cool, it condenses back to water. There are steam traps that keep the steam on the radiator side and the heat within the system, and then as the steam condenses back to water, that it drains back to the boiler, and those drain lines and that have the water in them, not the steam, are where most of the leaks are occurring.
The way you're going to plan on laying out your designs, if you will, as this moves forward, is it going to be one continuous type of design, or is it going to be more sectionalized like rolls? Meaning, there are select areas that I know there are folks that are thinking around about climate control in the school, whether we agree or disagree on the concept. There's folks still talking about climate control in certain areas of the school. So it might behoove us at this point during the design to make sure if we are considering climate control in certain areas, that those loops are designed so they can be chilled water loops also, maybe years down the road, rather than doing a single type of system, right? A bulk loop system where you're kind of stuck at that point. I'm not predicating climate control in the school, but I know there's been a lot of discussion over the decades about should the gym be, should this be, should the library be, should this office be, or whatever it may be, right? So if there's certain select areas that may be considered down the road, after everything is said and done, chillers could be an add-on down the road for select areas.
Yeah, and that's really going to have more of a impact on the equipment that's
Correct.
selected in there, and then having the capability of adding cooling to that equipment, and then the sizing and the insulation of the piping, and making sure it's adequate for chilled water.
So in layman's terms, because that's what you're going to get from me, we did have a conversation about the vertical unit ventilators being able to do both heating and cooling. Is that would that be a recommendation?
They would have the capability, either self-contained or a chilled water system, but we'd have, those discussions on any equipment that we're replacing. We would have the capability of adding air conditioning if we're replacing pieces of equipment, whether it's a self-contained unit or upgrading to a central chiller system and a chilled water piping system throughout the building, and that's we can have those conversations and we can look at the cost implications.
And I may have missed this, I apologize. I was late. Is the thinking, I guess, from the board who ultimately makes the decision, to really zero in on phase 1, and phase 2 is wants down the road, or is it a simultaneous conversation that's going to happen at the same time? Just because from my experience in these bonds in this community, things have a tendency to create a life of their own, and as that life expands, it's going to take up more energy from the board, the district, and the community. And as 1 and 2 phases merge together, my personal opinion, you're going to create a fairly significant event that's going to generate a lot of conversation. And I think personally it's going to take away from a lot of other things that you may want to be doing in the next 12 months. So you got brand new administrators, high school, elementary, elementary, middle, high school principal who's new. If you're going into the 9 million plus range of conversation simultaneously, I think that could be problematic.
You're going to be stalled. It's going to get stalled.
Yeah, the board had a lot of conversations about this. There was a point in time where we had it all wrapped into one big referendum. There was, but then we knew there would be people who wouldn't believe in the new space, right? And then we didn't want that to cause the need, the stuff like the heating system and that we know we have to have in place. We didn't want that to fail. So we also thought that they were two different thought processes. Like to get a building up and running and to keep it salvageable is a different thing in our thought process about education than do we need flexible space and a wellness center. That's a different thought process. Those are two different things. And we wanted the community to really be able to say yes to both of those in separate ways, because they're not the same. They're not really wrapped up into the same exact delivery. So the board decided to separate them into two different lanes. And we also decided that we really wanted to focus on what is being called phase 1, because we know it has to happen, and it has to happen, yesterday in order to keep the buildings open. So that's our focus. And I think this phase 2 idea of the high school expansion, it's not the focus right now. That's not to say it's not important, that it couldn't be very meaningful, but we know that right now is not the time to be putting energy into that for all the reasons that you outlined. And we don't want to have any confusion or agita about the first phase, because the first phase is crucial. The other thing that we talked about as a board was we were also trying to be cognizant of what's happening in the community in general in terms of being asked for tax increases. So this is going to be a cost increase, right? This is going to increase people's taxes. And we also know that the village has their list of things that they need from the taxpayer too. There's a new dam system that's about to be asked for. The fire company needs something that are all very important. And we didn't want to overburden the taxpayer. So we were trying to be cognizant of the big picture along the way. So that's kind of where we're currently at with it. So I'm agreeing with you. Go ahead, Diana.
This is what I'm not clear on, in terms of the bond issue, Phase 1, Phase 2, or whether this is part of this discussion. Is the bond just going to deal with Phase 1, just with the needs? So we're not going to talk about things like a new auditorium or carpeting in the current auditorium. Am I understanding that correctly?
The bond referendum that we're talking about putting on for May 2018 is only to deal with Phase 1. The Phase 2, for lack of a better term, dealing with the new space, is to be determined. We haven't set a timeline for that yet. I don't know when that happens. But it doesn't necessarily happen next year.
The thing that we're talking about most is the capital improvements, which have to be done. But there were, if I remember correctly, there were in some of the Phase 1 slides talk of certain things to the auditorium, the current auditorium, like seats, which to me sounds like, and I don't know, I mean, my experience has been there okay, but maybe, there are things that I haven't noticed. But my thought is that's the kind of thing that might cause agita and take away from the more serious problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. Does anyone want to talk about the seats in the auditorium?
The seats are what we're discussing is what's in the balcony. Right. And there are seats that are there, and I know that there's concern about them being in disrepair or in near future being in disrepair. So what we are looking at in the auditorium would be to paint it, and we have a lot of chipping and things that are happening there, and replacement seats. But part of what we're doing here, and part of why we're having this, is to get an understanding of what the community feels. And if the blue plastic seats are okay and we want to keep them, we can do that. And so these are the things we're looking at. If this is it, if this is the one referendum that ends up happening, and if there in the future there may be a Phase 2 or there may not. So if this is the one opportunity, what are the areas within the district that really need to be considered? And that's why those are in there. Could we get by without them? Sure. In 10 years, are we going to be looking at a problem? Very possibly. And then what would happen at that point? So we can either say just do the absolute necessities right now, and that would help us kind of figure out where we're going with this. Or if we're looking at the needs within the next decade, especially if there isn't another bond referendum, what it should be. And so I think that we need the thinking and the advice from this group or from anybody else in the community that has an opinion, which will help us determine what goes into the project.
Because my perspective is that, penny wise, pound foolish. If it's a real, we're doing a Band-Aid now and it's going to cost much more to, the problems that come after that because we didn't do the fix. My perspective is then do the fix. But if it's something that, if you do a Band-Aid now, it's not going to cause harm. You can fix it. You can delay fixing it. It's a different thing, just given the fact that we've got some, real serious capital project problems. But the other thing I wanted to ask from someone who's from the community and who's been here for a long time is I'm curious historically, so we've had an expansion in the past, I guess you said in the 60s, the gym, is that correct? The cafeteria and the gym. I'm just curious kind of how did that go? Like how was that successful? And was there a lot of conflict?
I think back then, I don't think there was a whole lot of conflict over in the school was growing. The student population was growing, so I don't think that was there was a need for a cafeteria, there was a need for the larger gym, because the small gym in the auditorium, as we call it, just wasn't cutting it, right? So really that didn't spark a whole lot of discussions. What sparked a whole lot of discussions was the high school up on top, right? That went through a number of years, for that high school to be built, and that high school was really sold that was going to be the end all of having to continue to build out that high school. So seeing things for expanding that high school up on the hill, you know, the people who have been in the community for many years are going to see that and say, why am I spending this money? You know, we just went through all this. We're still spending. We're still paying for that. Yet we're expanding it, right? So I think some of that clarity I talked about earlier. That, you know, what's a zero-based budget? I haven't heard anybody talk about zero-based budget for the bond to float, and then what are the adders on top of that based on a prioritized list of the phase one, right? I think, you know, that approach, I think based on, you know, based on what we're talking about for the bonds that are coming off the budget rolls, right? And then, you know, of the prioritized list here, because I can't believe this list is prioritized the way it's laid out. You know, where are we going to get to zero base, and what can we do for zero base? And then of that priority, what are we going to do for added dollar value to the to the taxpayer, same thing, right? And then what's that going to get them, right? Because like Joe was saying, if that visibility is not there, we're going to have a difficult time. You're going to have a difficult time trying to make the necessary improvements. And I'm not kidding. You know, the heating system has been kicked down the road for decades. Right, and it needs to be done. It just, you know, I remember when I was a kid going to school here, it was you know, less than $1 million to do what needed to be done. And here we are talking, if you add this up, what are we talking? Maybe $6-7 million. You guys do your homework. You're talking about a bond here that's probably close to $15 million by the time we're all said and done. Is that what we're prepared to put out there? I don't know. You know, I think this list needs to really be looked at, because when I see here that, you know, for upgrading the electrical system, it's on the must-have, and the first thing is seek architect's opinion. That tells me right off the bat how much homework is really going into several $1 million of upgrading the electrical system to both of to this whole campus, because I think that's what you guys are talking about. You know, so I think some of the homework needs to get done to refine this, and then really prioritize, and then look at zero-based budgeting for the taxpayers, and then go from there of what we can afford and what we feel the community will support in a bond referendum.
So the Building and Grounds Committee have been having similar type of conversations. And so the first phase is this meeting with the public so we can hear your thinking on it. We have already, I think we have a fiscal advisor that's coming in that's going to be helping us with the schedule of bonds, of debt that's phasing out and what could happen when debt phases in. So that's in the works. We have to decide exactly what it is we're going to be looking at in order to be able to get a good understanding of that. And part of what we're doing is these are the things that we have classified into phase one. And if there are things that the committee, the board, the Building and Grounds Committee tells us should be removed or should be enhanced, that's the conversation where we are now. And then when the fiscal advisor comes in, we've had John with us now for the last few months starting to talk about this, and he has an idea. He has a good understanding of where it's going, but we haven't solidified the plans yet. So it's very difficult to get to the point where we can do that.
Well, understand, you know, like I said, from the list here, you know, as the must-needs, and granted, there are many of these things that I think the school will get support of from the community, but there are some that are here that are kind of coming across as, does it really have to be done now? Is it got another 10, 15, 20 years in the life?
Yeah, so I'm new to the Building and Grounds Committee this year, and originally, like the bleachers, for example, in the gymnasium, I thought, now I went and looked at those, right? And I know that the Grounds Committee and the Buildings Committee has jury-rigged those in any number of ways. And they're just flat out unsafe. I mean, you can't use them anywhere. So that was a must. And no, but hear me out. So there are many things on this list that, by their description, would appear as like, well, that's an option. But you really need to be able to engage in the specificity of the thing to understand whether it is or not. And that's what we're being asked to do, is to engage in that and participate in the discussion. But maybe the language here doesn't capture the reality of the issue, but it requires that we look at it. So I was thinking, you know, why would we do these bleachers? That makes no sense. But it could also apply to the auditorium seating, because if it gets to the point where now we have to close off the balcony completely, or now we have to, just replace the chairs and it's an emergency tomorrow, that's where you don't want to be. No, I understand, but I'm just saying, that's why we want to think, in advance and try to not kick the can down the road and be addressing things in a timely manner rather than on an emergency basis.
But we need more information. What's,
That's right,
really
and that's-
understand what's the,
Right.
where's the emergency? I get the bleachers are absolutely an emergency. Our insurance carrier has said so. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
With the seating in the auditorium, all I'm saying is it an emergency? Is it an emergency in 2 years? Is it an emergency in 10 years? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't have enough
Exactly.
information.
And that's why we all need to participate and be educated on what the list actually represents. And, we got to be able to be informed in order to participate.
Yeah.
And that's where, I'm not singling that out, I'm just using it as an example. One wouldn't have thought that would be a necessary thing, but in
Right.
fact, we have violations from the school authority on that for some standing years, so we need to take care of that. And there are other things on here like that. For example, the windows in the elementary school are at this point funnels inviting water to go inside the wall. Now, how long can you do that before you have to replace the wall and the lintel? And the,
Communities that fought against that level of window replacement back, I think, in the 80s when they were done, but that was the cheap and dirty way to do it.
well, that's the problem, is that if
Okay.
we keep doing the thing that's the least expensive right now, we are just kicking the can down the road and making someone else deal with it. So we need to look at solutions that actually are lasting and not just Band-Aids. So it's been very informative working on building the ground, because in fact, you got to go and, put a knife in it and see how is it? What's it like? Is it solid? Is it not? And we need to be able to convey that information to all of the communities so they're willing to vote on it.
So the big ticket item on phase one is clearly the pipe replacement. And it's a large number, but it's also a very ballpark figure from all appearances. And that's a number that we really need to have confidence in. Now, I have a report that was put together by AKF consultants that did a heating study for the school in 2009. Now, this study was ultimately discredited, so I don't want to use this as a realistic cost. But they estimated the cost to replace the steam distribution piping with new hot water piping at $290,000. So that's in a totally different ballpark from this 3 to 4 million plus 25% for soft costs. So where's this number coming from? And have we had multiple professionals assess the condition of the system as it exists and what it would actually cost to do the replacement?
Right now, it's a very rough estimate based on similar projects we've completed. There hasn't been any in-depth evaluations, there's been no development of a design, and there's been no development of a cost estimate. So right now, it's a very rough ballpark estimate.
Well, I would say that a really important next step would be to get an accurate cost associated with that line item, given the importance that you've attached to it.
Yeah, Peter, we thought it was very important to get people in right from the ground floor. And before we start developing it, we need to have some input from the community. And then we can go through the next phase, which is the development phase. No plans have been drawn. We don't have an idea of where we're going to be buying the equipment from. All that has to be happening. And if you look at some of the timelines, we're looking at, this is the first meeting that we're having. We'll be having another meeting at the end of the summer, beginning of the school year, which is going to give us more information. It'll be proposed to the board. There will be further discussions. And throughout the fall is really the time we'll be starting to give some specifics. And we're looking at having a vote at next May. And so we have the year to develop it, but we wanted to have a kickoff meeting before the summer started, just so there's an understanding of what we're considering, what's been on the list. Should we be modifying the list? Is there something that's not here that we should be adding, or is there something here that we should be taking away? And this is the beginning, the first step of the community input. So we have a lot to do, and John's going to be with us every step of the way.
So what's the role of this group versus the Building and Grounds Committee, which is kind of a microcosm of what this group is?
The Building and Grounds Committee helped us develop the list of things that, and we had the building condition survey, and if you looked at the building condition survey, we could be spending so much money to get what the building condition survey says that we should be doing done, that we really had to look at what are the immediate needs, what are the things that we really need to consider, and where you may look at this and say new auditorium seating in the balcony may be more of a wish than a need. We're looking at what if this is the only referendum we have for this district, what should be considered on this list so we don't have a problem in the near future. And so some of the things we probably, and if this is something, and I think, Diana, what you said causes angst, if this is something that could potentially cause angst, we need to know that. And we need to hear from the community that this may not be something that the community would consider in a certain way, or it may be. And so that's the voice of the community is very important here. And this is the community's referendum, this is the community's school, and we have to make sure that we keep it in a way that we can educate our children well. And are there other things we could add to this that would allow it to be, move away from a health and safety aspect to more of a want aspect? Sure, but this is right now what we were considering based on everything that we've gotten, including the building condition survey, what we need to do. And so that's what this is. But the Building and Grounds Committee, and I can tell you, Paul and the other members that have been with us throughout this whole process, they've been invaluable. Their information, their expertise, the understanding of what's going on, the tours that we've taken, the information that they understand, and it's helped us to create this list.
So going back to process question again, so how will the Building and Grounds Committee interact with this group, if at all, going forward? Obviously, they've done this, and I was part of the Building and Grounds for many years, and some of this is all repeat stuff. But going forward, how will this group interact with Building and Grounds, assuming both are parallel and functioning? And maybe they're not. I don't know. That's what I'm asking. What is the process?
Well, right now you have 4 members of the Building and Grounds Committee here. Paul is kind of a perennial member of the Building and Grounds Committee, and also an expert, and he has the expertise that helps us. Ann and I are regular. Mike is regular. Laura Hammond, one of our board vice president, is a regular, and then Adam Hurd is a regular. And we have people that come and go at different times. So that's been the real meat of the Building and Grounds Committee. So many of them are here, and Paul really is here to represent the community's aspect of the Building and Grounds Committee, and we'll probably have people coming on and off of this committee as we continue in our discussions.
So is this group kind of about offering the community perspective, because part of the task that we're talking about is defining this referendum, but then also figuring out how to talk about it so that people understand it, get behind it, and want to vote for it.
Right.
So is what you're saying that this focus group is about that community piece, about figuring out, kind of giving you that pulse of the community and helping you figure out how to talk about it in meaningful ways, so that they're working in conjunction with the Building and Grounds?
Yes, and we did not want to bring a document that looked like it was fait accompli. We wanted to bring a document that's in its infancy stage, that gave the recommendations of the Building and Grounds. We brought it to the public and say, this is what the Building and Grounds department or committee has recommended. Now, this is the recommendations. We'd like you to take a look at it and let us know what you think. And so this is the first of those, hopefully, many meetings that we will be having that will help us understand. And so where maybe the Building and Grounds was our steering committee, this is a committee that can give us insight and suggestions.
What is the process so when we say bringing it to the community, so we're just a minuscule part of the community, but I know for me, and I may be embarrassed to say, when there's a referendum or a vote, you know, do we need more school buses? I always vote, I vote without knowing really what is going on with the budget. And I'm sure there are lots, you know, most people are the same way, voting for the budget. Is there a better, I mean, and this is more important, because when it's budget neutral, it's an easy vote. When it's tax neutral, it's an easy vote. Are we working on what the process is going to be to do outreach to the community in a better way?
Part of this, everybody in the community was invited to this meeting. And we sent a letter probably 2 weeks ago, and then we sent a reminder today. So anybody who we thought would have an interest in coming and hearing, we're inviting in. And then there will be many steps along the way. But go ahead, Sandy.
To continue with that point. So I agree with Diana that I think it's hard. I think communication is difficult. I think we all know that it's difficult, and often, you know, the community feels like they haven't been communicated to. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you communicate to a community so they really feel like they had an opportunity to be involved? You know, I don't know if I have a specific answer to that, but I know many people, because of whatever reasons they may not be able to come to a forum like this, or may not, you know, want to come to a forum like this. So, like, what are the other possibilities to make the community feel like they really are involved in decision making, and not just the decision making, but maybe also, you know, to be asked questions like what do they want? And I understand that, you know, we're not doing a wish list of like what does everybody want to make the school, you know, the buildings and grounds the most fabulous as it could be. We have to think more of, you know, what can we afford, and so health and safety is of most importance now. But what if, for example, the community got an email with a survey monkey, let's say, for example, and where they got to not just say yes or no, but even say, like, what do you think would be an important addition to the school building, you know, to add to the health and safety of the children in the community? You know, what are some of your ideas? And they might, I mean, I don't know, but they might be more apt to fill out a very quick survey rather than come to a meeting. But I think there have to be, you know, other avenues of communication other than, you know, a coffee in the morning or an evening forum for the community to really feel like that they're involved. So, and just on that point, just if I were given a survey, one thing that I was thinking that I don't know if it fits in with health and safety, but I think it does to some degree, is I think now, especially in the elementary school, more and more parents are coming to visit the school and want to participate in the school day, and it is impossible to park. I think we have 4 parking spaces for visitors, and very often you see people triple parking or parking where they're not supposed to, and I can say that I am guilty of that. I wonder if that is something that can be reviewed as an addition to the list.
Well, if you look where it says district-wide paving, if you look on the bottom of this proposed Phase 1, parking's in there.
Oh, I thought I saw high school parking.
No, it says elementary playground, bell lot, cafe parking lot, student parking area, walkways, and so and then on the last one says additional parking. So yes, we understand, and I can tell you, since I've been here, I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had about parking. And we've actually increased the number of parking spaces on campus substantially over the last few years, but we have a long way to go. And yes, I totally get that. Yeah.
Put, 25 new spaces in, 12?
Well, we put 25 up at the high school. We added an additional 4 up at the district office for visitor parking. We gave up a couple of spots. Deputy Piazza helped us condense some of the parking we had here, and so we gained a couple more visitor spots here and also out here in the Bell parking lot. So we did add a substantial enough, and I could attest to the fact that Dr. Bowers has always been asking me about parking.
I did just want to add one more point about communication, which is, I don't know if we're really, we seem to be focusing on communication with the school community, because the emails that are going out to, parents. But what about communication with people who are not parents, seniors, people who don't have kids? And I think when I was talking about communication, that's what I was thinking about, because these are the voters that we're going to need to convince.
So other thoughts, and Sandy, if you have any suggestions other than a Survey Monkey, and I think that that's a good idea, and that may be something as like a back-to-school survey that could help us. But we are also, for people that don't want to be part of this, we're also videotaping it, so it's available for, just as we do for our board meetings. So there's always opportunities, and you would actually be surprised how many people watch our board meetings. And you wouldn't think it, but they seem to have an interest in it, and I'm hoping that at least with this, that they have an interest in it. And any other suggestions anybody has, we'd be more than happy.
We just talked about putting this, like making it a buildings and grounds hot button on the homepage of the website where they could easily find the minutes from the committee minutes,
Yes.
the recordings of this. So, to have to go through board docs to find the minutes and then to go through the board meeting to figure out where we talked about it, those are steps. And if we can eliminate those steps and kind of package it a little bit as buildings and grounds info, that might be helpful.
And we have actually already begun that process. It will expand as we go through it, but that will be a link on the front page of the website that you can go to. So,
Well,
yes.
No, go ahead. Finish the
Okay.
thought,
Yeah, well, just, in response to people outside of the Haldane community, seniors and people without children, I don't know how feasible it would be to have mass mailings, but I don't think necessarily through going to a website or email is the best form of communicating. People don't look at their emails, people don't bother going to a website. I don't know if people look at their mail either. It's hard to say, what is the best way to actually, communicate with people. But I think we should try something outside of the electronic world to try to communicate with those people who are, not connected with the school.
This segues well into something that I wanted to introduce, which is that my name is Laura Eldon. I'm parent of a kindergartner, so I'm relatively new to the process and to the school. But Liz, Kelly, and I have, this year we had joined with Dr. Bowers and sort of joined with Julia Sniffen as we created a subcommittee of wellness that was called the Outdoor Learning Committee, just focusing on looking for opportunities around the campus, the existing campus for outdoor learning, because that was a special interest of ours. So as an aside, in that exploration, we met with Buildings and Grounds, with Mike and Tony, and we toured the campus and learned a lot about some of the issues, especially pertaining to outdoor maintenance issues and concerns and circulation. And one of the things that we started, I'm trained as an architectural designer, Liz is a landscape designer, and one of the things that we are just interested in exploring and is really understanding the campus as a whole through looking at like a map of it and a master plan. And what we had already sort of started talking about creating a master plan document that's very visually recognizable, color-coded, with areas that are already on the table, both interior and exterior, that require upgrades. And, visually representing them in a graphic form could be really helpful to creating that kind of community awareness that Sandy is talking about. And then how to distribute that graphic information, is a question to be asked once the summer's over, and hopefully we've worked on this document that we're hoping to just volunteer to Buildings and Grounds and to this focus group and the board. And but we sort of played around with this idea of a community charrette, where once the document is there, you can put a poster campaign out, and just frame a question as to, what is Haldane, or what does Haldane need, or, whatever the question may be, sort of gearing it to really getting a response from the community at large, many of whom might not respond to an email, but might see the posters, might want to respond to that. And then it can be a real, it could reach a broader audience potentially. So just wanted to, that was already being discussed, and hopefully there's an avenue to sort of volunteer that. So I think that's it. I have one question, actually. That was a long statement. Sorry. I guess my question, being new to the process, is on the proposition number 2 that was voted on in May, the gym bleachers and the elementary school library renovation, seating, carpet, upholstery. Is there a way to describe in a nutshell what the process was for the getting together the scope of work, and then at what, it says work being scheduled, but at what point is the work right now? Are there design documents? Are there design drawings already completed? Yeah, just for someone new to the process, how did that go? Because I think that could be instructive as to how future stuff will go.
Well, I can tell you the recommendation came from the Building and Grounds Committee. And so it was discussed over time, and we were looking at things that, and also the building condition survey, and also from our insurance carrier. So this is input that came from all of that. And John also joined us. So John, if you want to just share if there's anything that you can share about that. He came in the tail end, and he's giving us ideas of what we should be buying. And so this is kind of basic stuff. We're just buying bleachers. We have a number of other things that are in there, but this is more cut and dry. We're under the $100,000 limit. We don't necessarily need architectural drawings to buy the bleachers. And correct.
John already did.
And John he is working in the library. He's doing some work for the library bench area that's being rebuilt.
So,
Laura,
yeah.
just to give you more context, the Buildings and Grounds made the recommendation, then that was brought before the board, and then we talked about it at countless meetings, and we tried to figure out, is it the best course of action to replace the bleachers? Can we repair the bleachers? Can you give us an estimate cost for this? How many years is it going to stay if we have this? So we have these lengthy conversations that we keep sending Mike and Ann back to get more information, more numbers. And then at the end of the day, we make a decision and we say, okay, based on what, the numbers we're getting from Ann, the recommendations we're getting from Dr. Bowers and Mike Tuardi, we say, okay, we want to go forward and have new bleachers. That's going to cost X amount of dollars. And then we think, well, how are we going to pay for that? So then we said, well, we have money in our capital reserve account. We can use it for that, but we have to get voter approval to use it for that. So the money's there, but we can't use the capital reserve money unless the voters say, go ahead and use it for X.
And that's what we voted on.
And that's what you voted on in May. And the library renovations, that was thrown in a little bit along the way because it could stay under the $100,000 number. If we can stay under $100,000, then we don't. Then we can keep it on the capital reserve fund, and there's also a state aid gets driven if it's around that amount. In one lump sum. So we get $35,000 approximately back the following year. So really this project only cost about $65,000, but we upfront the $100,000. So that's kind of how it works. Go ahead.
And we're hoping to have it done over the summer.
Okay.
So, it's a fast track kind of situation. We have everything together, and hopefully when we get back in September, it'll be done.
My only community feedback as a member of this community and is that for things where we're considering interior finishes in the school, I work a lot with indoor air quality and low VOC, especially if we're talking about health and wellness and whatever the improvements that are being proposed are how they are contributing to sort of durability and health and wellness and all of these things. I'm just curious if there was any sort of, because that consideration in terms of material finishes can happen at any point in the process. Sometimes it's a very tight scope of work in the bid documents, and sometimes it's determined sort of as the builders are involved. And so just wondering if there's any attention being paid to sort of Green Guard certified fabrics, and these things are pretty widely available and affordable. It's just to know to look for the certifications or to know to look to ask that it's low VOC and just a concern I have. So
I appreciate that. What happens, and now that the voters approved that we can use the money for that, you're talking about the elementary school library renovations predominantly.
Materials are being
Yeah.
introduced into the building. Yeah.
So then they can draw the plans, and so after the vote is yes, then they know that the money is going to be able to be used. So then they can kind of draw the plans and go through that process, I'm assuming, and we'll be picking out their materials and doing that dance. Am I correct?
Yeah, and that scope of work was really so limited that there wasn't a lot of discussions on finishes or different options on
Not yet,
finishes.
but it's going to happen sort of in this compressed sort of schedule, hopefully.
On that scope, there weren't a lot of options to really consider other than the carpeting within
That's
the.
very important.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
carpeting that has pretty toxic adhesives and stuff. Just to know that we're just paying mind to those to avoid those and to go with ones that don't have that. Since they are becoming more and more. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I would just like to add, as everyone reviews this list here, the items that are on the need list phase 1, I heard earlier that, it's like, oh, is that really a need? It may not appear, and as Peter or Paul had to leave, so he did reiterate that it might not be clear. But if you're looking at the list and you're seeing some things where you can say, that can really wait 5 years, the goal is to not have a capital referendum every few years. Maybe a $100,000 project because we're getting $35,000 back the next year, and we can roll that money into another $100,000 project the following year and just keep that aid coming back to us. But if we have small projects that are going to have to be done in the next few years, maybe not the next 2, but maybe the next 5, and we have money in our capital reserve that we like to use for emergency repairs, because we don't know. It's an old building. We don't know an expansion tank could blow as it has in the past, and it's nice to have $35,000 or $50,000 that you can spend to repair something immediately. So when we're looking to maybe cross some things off the list, keep in mind that this is an opportunity to get smaller projects done that might be 5 years out and get that 35% aid on it. Because if we're spending money, and we're behind the ball and we're doing repairs, we're doing emergency repairs, or we're trying to put something in the budget 5 years from now, we've left 35% on the table. So those are types of things to keep in mind as you're looking at the individual items. Okay.
So other questions or suggestions or thoughts?
One thing I would suggest, and if the board, and they obviously probably still need to talk about this, if they're really zeroing in on phase 1 and not phase 2 plus, I think you have to be clear to the community that that's what's actually happening. So in the last 10 days, I was at 2 funerals, a wedding, and a basketball game. And besides, Joe, how you been? The second question was 9 million plus, what are we doing? So I think you gotta kind of nip that one quick. And then the second piece of that question is, in the phase 1, the why. So why is this on the list? Why is that on the list? Why is that on the list? And then provide supporting documentation for, there are people like Peter Henderson will read the Damiano Beryl study line by line, which is good. You want people like that. There are other people that will want to just hear a simple explanation about something on the list. But the why, I think, is absolutely imperative. One of the problems that we had when we did the high school building back in 2004 is because the why was never answered clearly. And that's where we got into trouble. And when we started that project, because I got sworn into the board, the day we broke ground, we were over budget before we even started. Because they didn't ask and follow up as much on the why as they should have. So, as was already said, there was a perception that this new building is going to provide all this space, but if you did the math of plus class, minus class, ADA improvements, elevators, take out those classes, it was like 4 classrooms or something. So I think the why is going to be extremely important as you move forward, but getting that first piece of this equation, that is this a $9 million conversation, is it a 3, is it a 4? Because different people are going to rise up as that dollar amount rises. And as you read the building condition survey, everything on there is important. And I think the grasp that the board probably always has is, you know, what can we do realistically that the community will support? And I think that's what you got to do. You got to do the whys, and you got to be clear right out of the bat, what is it you really want to accomplish? Because as this conversation broadens and 1 phase turns into 2 phase, 9 is going to be 15 million in 60 days, and I could guarantee it. Because people want things. And nobody's going to get excited over pneumatic controls, but they will get excited over a centrally air-conditioned auditorium. And the number's just going to keep going and going, and you're going to get to a place that you can't come back from other than a negative vote. And that's what happened with the building before this high school. It was a $20-something million project that got slaughtered because it was just too much. Was it the right thing to do? Maybe. But we weren't ready for it as a community, and that's ultimately what this is about. So that's just my recommendation and advice as someone who's been through this process is be crystal clear and be specific as to what you really are trying to accomplish, because it can just have a life of its own. And once it does, you can't control it.
Okay, well, to be continued. I appreciate all your input and your time and your willingness to give us some suggestions. We have a lot to think about as we go into the planning phase a little bit more deeply over the summer, and we'll be inviting people back in September, and hopefully we will have many of those questions already answered. So, John, anything you would like to say? No? Okay, well, thank you for coming out on this steamy night.